And the basic idea is just start, just begin. Because we get so nervous about where do we start? We wanted everything to be perfect the first time. We just want to sit down and everything must kind of flow. And with the book, you kind of go, well, which chapter do you start on? Do I start on how to tell a people lying? Do I start on presentation techniques? Do I start on interview techniques? Which stories do I use? And you kind of start forming these things in your head the whole time, and you kind of think that you've got to get that order in your head right before you can start. Yeah. And that's not the case at all. The moment you actually start, it starts to flow. Do something instead of doing nothing. That was kind of, and a bad idea is still better than no idea.
How's it, everyone? Happy New Year. All the best for 2025. We are 25 years since the millennium, and we are 25 years away from 2050. How crazy is that? And what would the year be on the Expect Performance podcast if we didn't touch base with the hat-trick hero? David Allen is back for episode number 3 on the Expect Performance podcast. And here we're talking about his brand new book called Decoding Body Language. David came on the show for his first appearance to discuss body language. And if that interested you, then this episode is an absolute must, because here we build on the content that we covered there. With the likes of starting small and gaining momentum. That's David sharing his learnings from writing his second book, as well as how to read the room. What body language do we look for to establish the nature and the vibe in the room, as well as the law of the second person. And finally, what are the telltale signs when somebody is feeling uncomfortable in a conversation or a topic of conversation, and how do we pivot to make sure that we maximize the potential to get a positive outcome in that particular engagement. Lastly, please let me draw your attention to David's upcoming book launch, and the dates and the venues are as follows. 30th of January, Thursday the 30th of January at Nottingham Road Village Cafe, Gowrie Village, from 5:30 to 6:30, as well as Westville Country Club on Wednesday the 5th of February from 5:30 to 6:30. I shall provide you with the details in the show notes, as well as where you can find David's book. Please go and check this out if you like this episode, which I know you're going to. Support David and his journey, as this is all that we need from our community. Thank you very much, and here is to a good year. And some things never change. Please like, share, subscribe, and enjoy. Dave Allen, the hat-trick hero, welcome back the third time on the Expect Performance podcast. Happy New Year, season's greetings, all the rest.
Clinton, thank you very much, and thanks for having me back. I always enjoy my time with you. It's very stimulating.
Yeah.
And I love it. So yeah, season's greetings. Looking forward to 2025.
Yeah, it's going to be a good year, and it's already taken an exciting turn for you. So to give some context, when you came on for the first episode, we discussed body language, and your previous book, or your first book, Leadership in the Trees. And at that stage, I'd asked you if you've got anything exciting coming up, and you said that you're in the process of writing a new book on body language itself. And now we're here on the third episode at the start of 2025, when that goal and that ambition has come to fruition. And here it is, Decoding Body Language. Hey, well done, man.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it. The writing of the first book was a nice experience. I've never written before. I'm more of a speaker giving talks. And the idea of actually writing something down was not very comfortable at all. But got through that, and then I was kind of very keen because my body language content really started taking off. Corporates and schools wanted the leadership content. But then the moment that I started delivering the body language content, that's what people really wanted to hear a lot more on. And
it certainly got a lot of legs, a lot of listenership.
Yes.
That first, it was a tremendous hit. People were very interested in the body language aspect.
And I love body language in a sense. I mean, the moment people ask me what do I do for a living, and I kind of say I'm a body language expert, you straight away see people go, that's nice, and they don't know what to do with it. And then they become very self-conscious about it. They assume that I'm reading them all the time, which was not the case at all. But then they become very conscious about it, and then they actually want to learn more about it, because we project when we're communicating. So much of our communication is through body language.
Yeah.
And so I was very tempted to actually, and I got asked to put my thoughts down onto a book. At the time, I'd actually been starting to do a second book on leadership. And then my publicist said, actually, put that book on hold. Let's rather do the body language book, because that seems to be the direction that, the one topic that people have a thirst for.
Yeah.
And I started doing that. It was a daunting project, as I say, because we just don't have a lot of time. With talks on the go and running camps and doing all these things, where do you actually stop to actually start writing a book?
Yeah.
And I'd actually forgotten some of the disciplines that I'd had to put in place on my first book. So my wife kind of reminded me of what I'd done, the process I'd had on the first book to really get the second one going.
Yeah.
And the basic idea is just start, just begin. Because we get so nervous about where do we start. We wanted everything to be perfect the first time. We just want to sit down and everything must kind of flow. And with the book, you kind of go, well, which chapter do you start on? Do I start on how to tell if people are lying? Do I start on presentation techniques? Do I start on interview techniques? Which stories do I use? And you kind of start forming these things in your head the whole time, and you kind of think that you've got to get that order in your head right before you can start.
Yeah.
And that's not the case at all. The moment you actually start, it starts to flow. Do something instead of doing nothing. That was kind of, and a bad idea is still better than no idea.
Yeah. I think that's important, especially with people at the start of the new year. Everybody's going to have different goals. In my space, it's going to be in the fitness realm. But it could be to read more. It could be to get into the gym more. It could be might be personal goals in a relationship. But often these things are quite daunting, and people don't know where to start. And the main thing is always, I don't have the time. But it's funny, if you set aside even 5 minutes, then you realize, actually, I've got time for 5 minutes. And then 5 minutes becomes 10 minutes. It's like, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I can. In my childhood, you would decide, okay, I just need to just sort out my bookshelf in my room. And you start with like 2 or 3 books. And then before you know it, everything on the bookshelf is down on the floor, and you're redoing the whole bloody lot.
Yes.
You're polishing the wood, and you're doing the whole story because it got momentum. And it didn't start with, I'm going to clean my entire room today. It started with, I just want to rearrange my books in a different format or sequence. And that's the power of getting positive momentum, like you said. So start with something small. Anything is better than nothing. It's not nothing. That is the key, And so I completely resonate, and I think it's a good example for people at the start of the new year who are wanting to create some change.
I found it very interesting because a lot of people were chatting to me about, because they knew 2024 for me was a very busy year. I ended up having 5 international bookings. So I was speaking in the States twice. I was in England. I was in Switzerland. And with my international bookings on giving talks and training, as well as my South African commitments, I had a very full plate. And people that knew me knew how busy I was, and they still turned around and said, but Dave, where did you get the time to actually do this? I mean, writing a book, it's a lot into it. Where did you get the time? And again, just explaining to that of, if it's something you really want to do, you actually make the time.
Exactly.
If it's a priority to you, you will make the time. And it doesn't have to be a huge amount. So with me, I knew that my downtime was every morning between 7 and 7:30. My wife takes the kids off and goes to school. She's a teacher, so she's kind of out, leaves at 7, is gone. I've got downtime between 7 and 7:30 every day. And normally I would just like veg out on on social media.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of a time when I asked a kid who also one of the students that I was giving talks to, and said, I don't have time for this, I don't have time for that. And I actually asked to see their phone and wanted to see their screen time. And they were averaging like 4 hours screen time a day. And you kind of say, what do you mean you don't have time? You've actually got plenty of time. You're not utilizing your time better. And I'd remembered that advice that I'd kind of given, and now you've got to take your own advice.
Which is one of the hardest things to do.
So I said, right, that's it, 30 minutes a day. That's all I'm doing, just 30 minutes a day. From 7 to 7:30, instead of vegging out on social media, I'm going to write. But Dave, what do you start with? What do you just write? And I sat down, chapter 1, gave it a go, and 30 minutes a day. By the Friday, by the 5 days, I started on the Monday. By the Friday, my first chapter 1 was done. But it was horrible. I mean, I was like, I kind of deleted most of it. I wasn't that impressed with it. But I didn't lose momentum. I kind of still thought, you know what, I'm still going to stick with the process. And the next week, again, 30 minutes a day, started writing it. And then what took me 5 days the week before to get my chapter 1, now within 3 days was there. And it was actually pretty decent, copy and paste and move around. And then I started chapter 2. But I didn't still have like a flow of how I wanted. I just started writing what I thought was a chapter, not knowing which one would be 1, 2, 3.
Correct.
And just started. And what I noticed is that I still stuck with the 30 minutes. And when I started at 7, I wasn't that motivated. But by the time the timer went off for 7:30, I was like, oh, wow, that time's done. And I realized that you don't take action because you feel motivated. You actually feel motivated because you took action.
Absolutely.
Just start. And I'm sure you can relate being in the gym field. You know, you would get a lot of people that come to you and say, listen, I just want to get fit. I just want to get in shape. I just want to, and that they've got all the theory in their heads as to how they think it's, and all you want to do is just pitch up. Just come for 30 minutes a day. Just pitch up. And it's that idea of just starting. Mark Twain, I love his quote, you know, the secret to getting ahead is getting started.
Yes.
And the secret to getting started is taking your complex, overwhelming tasks, breaking them down into small, manageable ones, and then starting on the first one. You know, just start.
Exactly.
And I relate back to when I got kids at Camp Solomon, and they'll come up, and we are back to basics camp. So the students will have tents. They're going to set up their own tents. And you'll give a student a tent, and very often a student that's never set up a tent before. And you'll get one student that'll kind of sit there, put the tent down, and just almost like just has no idea what to do, and they'll just crumble. And I always say to people, you know what, if you don't know what to do in a situation, just do the next right thing. What is the next right thing to do now? And in a tent setup, the next right thing is, let me unzip the tent to take out the contents. That's the next right thing to do. The next right thing to do after that, well, let me spread out the contents and see what's there. And then you okay, well, I've got poles and I've got canvas. Next right thing, let me try this pole. Hey, that doesn't work. Hold on, let me try this pole. And you're not going to get it right the first time. You're going to put the wrong pole in the wrong, but then you now change and you get ahead because you started it.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get it right every time, but within 5-6 minutes, I've got tents going up, but I've still got 1 or 2 kids that'll sit there. They're just so daunted by the idea of setting up a tent. And again, it was that realization of actually, you know what, just begin.
Yeah.
Just give it a go.
Absolutely. So I can relate to that in the respect of the podcast. So everything is done by me, with the exception of my lovely helper behind the camera who does the recording. But the post-editing, everything. And I mean, I had to teach myself how to edit a podcast. I had to figure out how the mics worked. I had to figure out how the audio faces worked. The software of editing, getting the audio to overlay with the video and then to mute the video audio so that the quality of audio from the mics come through and not the audio from the video. And then I had to figure out, okay, how do I do captions so that when I'm putting stuff up on LinkedIn and on Instagram, people can see also if the audio is not on, they can read the subtitles. And you know, that took a tremendous amount of time to figure out, and it was frustrating. And I mean, if I had to repeat to you some of the files and what I'd named those files, because I was so frustrated, I would be remiss of me I wouldn't repeat it on the show. But now, 55 episodes in, it's like clockwork. I know exactly what to do. I know, so much so that my fingers on the keyboard is automatically going to those same places because the pattern's ingrained now. It's tab, tab, boof, 50, tab, tab. And it didn't start like that, but I was prepared to hack a little bit in the beginning because it was a priority. And then now, a year and a half later, it's second nature, and it's exactly on an exact same scale with the book, I'm sure. Like you said, you started, it was a bit rusty, you didn't really like the first bit, but then let's try again next week, and then in 3 days it was there, and then I'm sure after that, you got into the rhythm and the flow of it. But speaking about the book, is there a particular chapter or theory that stands out to you that you enjoy personally the most?
On the book itself, we looked at body language things, and I kind of drew on a lot of my background. So coming from a policing background, I was also, so kind of body language plays a role straight away there. But I've had quite a very interesting life. If you look at what I started off with, doing leadership camps and running courses, and then I was also a nightclub bouncer for some of the biggest clubs down in Durban, standing on the door, and reading body language became a day-to-day thing. You've always got someone who's 16 years old saying, "I'm 18, I promise." How do you have those conversations? Plus also trying to look at threats, people that are kind of posturing up a bit too much or saying things. So it was very interesting going back into some of my previous stories. And what is nice is that I needed to reference some of the stuff that I'd learnt from either other bouncers when I first joined in. Some of the old school bouncers, they would teach me some of the tools of the trade, what to look out for. Or some of my previous mentors within the police, like that I might have crewed with, and they taught me a certain point that if you pull over a vehicle, look out for this, look out for that. And a lot of those lessons had stuck with me. And so the most interesting part was when I contacted those people, because now I want to mention their names, and say, "Listen, can I use your name? You taught me this. Can I use your name in my book?" They were like, "I didn't say that." They couldn't remember. It was such the stuff that they had commented on, or the situations that they're in, was so innate to them, that they actually couldn't remember the specific conversation. But then they would tell me situations that I supposedly was in, that they had witnessed, and I couldn't remember those things. And it made me realize how, when we talk to people or interact with people, we don't know the nuggets of gold we're actually giving someone. Someone would say a comment or motivate you or say something, and then you kind of forget about it, but you don't realize that person is carrying that for the rest of their life in a sense. It really had such an impact to them. And one of the crazy things I experienced when writing the book is, and come back to your question on any specific part, each chapter had its own little things where I realized those were nuggets of gold that someone else had kind of imparted to me, and I'd obviously shaped it and moved it. But how much we take for granted how we actually are impacting so many people on a daily basis. And we don't always realize this.
No, we underestimate that. And I think maybe it's also because we might not want that responsibility. When we realize how much our actions actually influence other people, what we say influences other people, it's an infinite responsibility that you have to take on a daily basis. And perhaps it's easier for people to remain ignorant to that in some sense, because they can get through life without as much accountability, But what you said there rang a bell for me. I had a client, must have been about 4 or 5 months ago. We're having a conversation about, I can't even remember what it was about, but he said to me, "Oh, Clint, and I know it's not perfect, but it's like you said to me 3 months ago, it's not nothing." And that stuck with me. And I had to think about it. I was like, did I really say that? And then he's like, yeah, you did. And so, I mean, I get that, you know. And then I think to myself, okay. People actually take on board what you say, you know. And it could be, like I sent a message to a friend this morning. And I just said to him, you know, Happy New Year, mate. Just by the way, I think you're a really good dad. Their Lati's 2 years old in February. I think you're a really good dad and you're doing a great job. And it's like,
powerful.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And he was so taken aback by that, because I don't think people say it often enough.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, I fully subscribe to what you're saying in terms of we don't realize the power that we have, not only in verbal communication, but in non-verbal communication, which is what this book is all about, you know? So tell me about, something sparked me there when you said, what do you look out for when you're approaching a police vehicle, just out of interest? What are the signs if you're pulling over a vehicle? Because that's interesting, man. So what are
not as approaching a police vehicle, if I'm approaching a suspect vehicle.
If you approaching a suspect
so
vehicle.
One of the points that was there was a Sergeant Meredith Faddy, when he was working flying squad, and I got an opportunity to work a couple of shifts on flying squad, and I was a young guy, police reservist. He's a sergeant, and he's been in the flying squad for a while. And at that point, I always remember him saying, because now your flying squad vehicles they normally look a lot smarter than your average police van. They kind of, back then, I think it was the Opel Cadets, and they had all the bells and whistles on it, so they had the lights on the side, and they actually looked rather intimidating.
Yeah.
And so naturally, if you pulled up next to any vehicle, the people in the vehicle would naturally turn and look at you in the flying squad vehicle, because it's an intimidating car, and we're in the vehicle with our bulletproofs and all that, so people would naturally just look around and they'd turn to look at us in the flying squad vehicle. But if we pulled up behind a vehicle and the driver can actually see us in the rear view mirror, and he'd normally say something like, oh, the police are here. And if we pulled up next to him and no one looked at us, like everyone was, because chances are they said, hey, the police are there, don't look, and just act normal. And everyone pretends like they're just looking forward. Like everyone sits up straight all of a sudden, and they're scared to make eye contact, because I think the moment they look at you, like we'll see the guilt in their face, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, no one's slouching in the car like you normally do. Everyone's sitting up dead straight, and no one looks at you. Like the moment we would see that, he pointed out, there's always something going on.
Yeah.
And the moment we now pull over that vehicle, I mean, he just recovered a lot of stolen firearms, a lot of drugs, inside the vehicle. Everyone acts. And it was one of the little tricks that he had taught me there.
That's so true, eh?
Another one was also Sergeant at the time, Dean van Gruenen, and we would be doing roadblocks and pulling over vehicles, and I was searching people inside the vehicle for any guns or anything moving. And most policemen the vehicle would come through, let's say a minibus taxi, for example. And most of the policemen, the taxi would come in, and the guys would offload all 15 passengers and then search and check and then reload, and nothing's there, and carry on going. But he would just open up the door, look around, and then, okay, you guys are fine, and carry on going. And the one time I asked him, I said, no, but he also, other times he'd open up the door, and then on the times that he chose, now we had to search, there was always something.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So he kind of had this real good, almost like the sixth sense, or I thought it was like the sixth sense, this intuition. And I asked him about it the one time. He said, no, look to see if people distance themselves from someone. Because in the confines of a minibus taxi, for example, everyone knows what's going on. Everyone can see what's happening. Everyone knows, who you are and what's it, because you're traveling with someone. So the moment someone would see the roadblock, take their weapon out and try to hide it, other people in the car can actually see what's happening. and they would naturally try and distance themselves from the suspicious person. It's a natural thing to, I've got nothing to do with this guy.
I'm not with this guy right here.
So the person on the right would turn this way, and the person on the left, and so that's what he was watching out for. He's just looking for someone distancing themselves. Like,
Sure.
And then that would pick up, hey, hold on. People are a lot now nervous because they know someone just put a gun on the ground. And so the chit-chat in the car was different, and people were distancing themselves. And that was one of his little tricks. And again, those kind of things is what inspired me to start to understand body language, was just learning the tricks of the trade from old school law enforcement and old school bouncers. Just learning the tricks of the trade. And then I kind of realized I can apply it in day-to-day life. When I was doing, as an instructor, we would run camps, and if we had to put kids, down the zip line or on the abseiling, why is it that certain instructors just had a much higher success rate than other instructors? And when you looked at it, was that body language. They built a rapport with someone. They got to understand someone. They would stand a certain way. They would get into a friendship zone. They would get someone to trust them. And what were the tools of the trade that they were using to get someone to relax and to trust?
Yeah.
I mean, going back to, I think, our first podcast where we spoke about you meet someone for the first time, they're going to one of 5 categories.
Correct.
Your friendship, your trust, your predator, your acute, someone you find attractive, indifferent, or idiot. And you're going to do certain things with your body language to get into a trust category.
Yeah.
And so the same thing would happen on an instructor aspect or a salesperson. And that's what kind of started this path of trying to understand people, of trying to understand body language a bit better. And a lot of stuff we take for granted. We think that we would just know these things. I was in England in the beginning of the year, and I was giving a talk at a school, and one of the teachers had said, they've got one of the problems that they battle with, because we always ask the school, like, what are you needing? Is there a communication problem? Do we come in with that? Is there self-esteem problems? Do we come in with that? And one of the things was on respect, this idea of how do we greet, how do we. And I ran a session, and there's a part in the book on it, on just how to get into a trust category. Just do a basic greeting, and how do we greet? Shake your hand, look someone in the eyes, just get the basics right. And she came up to him afterwards and said, what, Dave, in all the years I've been teaching, I didn't realize, I've never taught our students how to greet. Because we think, and it was like a weird statement, like that she was kind of saying to me, it's the first time anyone's taught us how to actually say hello. And I know it sounds weird, but we kind of think, well, surely that's natural. Surely everyone knows this. I mean, surely the parents would have taught, but you realize, no one's taught how the correct way of actually, doing a webby to webby, relatively firm handshake. If you've got sunglasses, lift your sunglasses, make eye contact, stand up, say hello, look someone in the eyes.
Yeah.
We assume parents would teach it. We assume other people. And it was that comment, coming back to those nuggets, that made me realize that no, we haven't actually taught this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you come back from kids, from students, because these were grade 10 kids, they went through school in COVID. They did 2 years, 3 years, where greeting someone was evil. You were not allowed to say hello. You were not allowed to greet. It
was unethical.
Yes, you were the most evil person in the world if you actually greeted someone. And then we kind of go, okay, but why aren't you now saying hello? We just expected people to change. And a lot of the kids don't have this idea of, and we think that people are being rude.
Yes.
And we just, and we kind of dismiss them sometimes. And we realize we actually haven't explained it. We actually haven't taught some of the basics. We got so wonderful at teaching up here, but we've actually forgotten the basics.
Yeah.
And when she'd mentioned that, I phoned up a friend of mine that runs quite a big sales team. And I said to him, I just want to ask you a question. I know it sounds weird, but have you ever taught your sales guys how to say hello? And he's like, what are you talking about? That's the most dumbest. And as he was giving me a hard time, that's the most dumbest, he kind of paused and went, oh, that's why they're so horrible at it. And it was like me asking the question made him realize, like he was battling within his own team.
Yeah.
They realized that his guys don't say hello properly, and realized that no one's actually taught them. Like, we teach all about all company ethics and company this and policies and procedures, but that first 30 seconds impact when a customer feels relaxed and judges your company in that first 30 seconds, are our people actually saying hello correctly? A lot of that, just getting some of the back to the basics, and a lot of what I wanted to do with the book was just mentioning the basics again and kind of reprogramming ourselves and teaching some of those.
Yeah, you've mentioned a couple of examples there, two different vehicles, the police vehicle, mentioned a classroom, a taxi, a classroom. These are group environments and group settings, and something that I've took particular interest in is your emphasis on being able to read a room. So what are some things that the listeners can take home when it comes to applying this knowledge of reading a room? How do we start going about something like that?
There's a chapter I've got there in the book on exactly that, understanding and looking at reading a room, and the way I've got it is trying to find out who is good friends with someone, or who has been doing naughty things or misbehaving, who is the partner in crime aspect. So if I tell a joke, if I come into a staff setting and I've got 20 staff members sitting there, and I tell a joke or I say something funny, people would naturally laugh. And in order to share the joke, they would normally laugh, turn and look at someone else in the room to share the joke with. Now, the person that you would turn to look at is actually the person you feel the most comfortable with in the room. So if I had to say something completely inappropriate, you'd actually, in a room of about 20 people, you'd turn and look at someone and goes, did Dave just say that? Because you almost want confirmation that I've said the wrong thing, and you want, did you just also hear? And the person that you would turn to is actually the person that you feel the most comfortable with in the room.
Yeah.
So if I tell a joke or if I say something and people laugh, but no one looks at anyone else, that means that there's no team building. I mean, there's no real team unity. We need to start doing some team building, because guys are working individually. There's no one else that people feel comfortable with. So it's one of the first things is to try to pick up who feels comfortable with whoever else. So when I do teacher training, staff development, and I mention this to teachers, because they'll get students that come in, and on kids, especially younger kids, the friendship dynamics change every day. That's my best friend today, but tomorrow and so if you want to know, who do you partner people up with? Because very often the kids can't sit next to their friends, they're randomly positioned, and now I need to know, who do I partner people up with to do a project? This is one of the things that the teacher would look at. If you had to make a comment or say a joke, and you'd see which kids would look at each other to share the joke with, then those guys would actually be able to partner up better with.
Okay.
So I talk about the same thing happens when you're guilty of something, when you're naughty. And you now know that you're naughty, and you want to share the blame with someone, and you look at your partner in crime. So we were in camp, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was one of the kids, something had been stolen, and the teachers had decided to handle it themselves. So they lined all the kids up over the mealtime, and they said, listen, whoever's stolen the stuff needs to come and report it. And no one said anything. No one moved. Everyone was just staring directly at the teacher and paying attention. And she wasn't getting any result from her threatening. So then she upped the ante and said, listen, whoever did this needs to report it. And by the way, then indicated to me, and knew that I was a police reservist, kind of indicated to me and said, and by the way, no, Mr. Dave over here is actually a policeman, and he'll get the sniffer dogs to come. The sniffer dogs don't work that way, but anyway, it was like she was just trying to up the ante. And Dave's a policeman, Mr. Dave's a policeman, and he'll get the sniffer dogs to come in and then kind of really up the ante. Now you could see everyone's like a lot more nervous. And two kids like looked at each other out of turn because they made eye contact to say, oh my word, like we're in really trouble. Like, do we?
Yeah.
And myself and my business partner, who obviously knows some of the stuff because we've been in business together, have explained, but he's not trained in anything. Just both of us were like, those are the two guilty guys.
Yes.
And we dismissed everyone. We went to the teacher, said, listen, let's just talk to these guys. And straight away, all the stuff came out and it was done. But this was so obvious the way that they just like both turned to look at each other now that they were very nervous about being caught out and the possible consequences. Mm-hmm. So part of reading the room is just understanding people and who feels comfortable with someone else.
Yeah.
Whether to up their guilt or to actually know that they can work well together, or we actually need to do a bit of team building because no one's really friendly within this environment.
Sure. Tell me about the second person law.
The law of the second person.
Yeah, because I think everybody that's married in particular will be able to relate to this on some level. And because it's a law, so nobody is immune to this law. So tell me about this, and then how can people apply that knowledge in their day-to-day life?
The law of the second person is pretty much understanding that you need that second voice to emphasize a point or to get your point across. Mm-hmm. So if you think of you upset at a supermarket, you purchased a toaster and the toaster doesn't work, now you come back the next day and you've got but you don't have that slip. You've thrown the slip away. And the salesperson is actually going to say, listen, sorry, sir, I can't return this. We don't have the slip. And you're like, but I've got my credit card receipt. And you just start the argument. It's not going anywhere. And you always get to a point that you can't win anymore because that you're just hitting this brick wall in your opinion and you're just not winning. So you always at that point asked to talk to the manager. I want to speak to the manager, please. And you actually begin quite rude with the salesperson. You're getting quite heated, you're upset, you're actually getting quite rude. And then you demand to speak to the manager. And the moment the manager comes, you actually change tact. You all of a sudden, okay, excuse me, sir, this was the problem. I know I don't have my receipt. This is what. And the manager actually reaffirms it. The manager says, listen, this is our store policy. Unless you've got your receipt, we can't return it.
Yeah.
And the second person has said exactly what the first person said. But now, because it's come from someone of perceived authority, and because it's kind of backed it up, and you now realize, okay, that's it. And the interesting thing is you normally try and change tact. You can say, oh, wow, well, you explained it so nicely. This person had an attitude because you want to justify why you just didn't pay attention in the first place.
Yes.
But you kind of normally leave the store knowing it's not going to go anywhere. And that's that second person. Mm-hmm. When myself and my business partner were running a zip line or an abseil, and I've got a kid that's naturally scared. They're scared, they're nervous, they've asked me 50 million questions, and have we tied the ropes right, and is this, and what's going to happen, and they're just scared, and they're delaying tactics. And I've spoken them through it in the last 30 minutes, saying everything's fine, everything's going to be wonderful. But when I can't get anywhere, I've tried my best, and then I kind of said, okay, Alfred, you come take over. My business partner would then come in and take over. And within like a minute, this kid would go. And I was like, what? I just chatted for 30 minutes. Like, what did you say? And I said, no, well, I didn't say anything different. I literally said the same thing. And that's when we realized it was because it was coming from a second person, someone that could back it up.
Yes.
The person would actually start to do it. And we brought that in as a second person. So we would, the moment one instructor, we were on two parts of a wall. So the moment you were battling for 20 minutes, trying to convince someone, we just say second person, and then another instructor will just come in and take over just to get down. But you've got to make sure there's no ego. You understand? It's not about what I've said or it just needs a second voice to re-emphasize the point. And then you'd actually get this person to go.
Sure.
My wife loves it because she would, and come back to your married person question is because someone would tell me, why don't my wife would be telling me all the time, for example, why don't I do this in my talks, or why don't I do that, or why don't I bring up these subjects? I'll be yeah, and then a while later I'll go to her and say, Bob said I should talk about, and I think it's a good idea, and she'd be like, what? I've been telling you this for ages, and it's like, oh yeah, well. And it's that kind of that second person aspect. You see, you looked at the person most comfortable in the room that you were guilty of when you. So we just brought in the reading the room part and the law of the second person.
Caught me there. You caught me big time.
So it's the idea that like your wife might say, you look good in white, and she's been telling you wear more white shirts, and I come along, and I say, white is really your color, you must go with it. And then you'll go back and say, I think I'm going to wear more white, and you want to know why your wife wants to strangle you half the time. And
it's so funny.
It's that law of the second person. So one of the things you want to do is when you understand it, again, you've got to get rid of the ego part. If I make sure, like if I'm within a business and I've got an upset client, and I mean, we always want to do best for our clients, but there's at some point going to be an upset client somewhere. And we'll sometimes have someone else deal with the upset client initially so that I can come in and be the law of the second person.
Yes.
So even when I get on a policing situation, now I'm a warrant officer, so I've got a bit of rank, and there might be a constable. And initially I'd actually, if there's a domestic disturbance or someone's making a noise, I'd actually want the constable to initiate the initial conversation to say, guys, please turn the music down. Because when the argument happens, I can then step in and be law of the second person and kind of say, listen, you actually do need to turn the music down. And then I get more compliance that way. If I end up being the first person, I've got to, at one point when it's coming to a point, I've got to be able to step back and then allow someone else to come in to seal the deal and explain them to turn the music down.
Sure.
So when you understand it, you can then start to apply it in your setup. When we talk to guys at schools, for example, headmasters, you don't, if they've got an irate parent, you actually want the parent not to be able to go to the headmaster directly or go to the CEO directly. They need to be able to have the conversation with the teacher initially, have the argument, have the discussion. Hopefully it gets resolved there. If it doesn't get resolved, then you can go allow. But I mean, me as a CEO, I don't want direct access to that upset parent straight away.
Yes.
Because then I can't implement the law of the second person. I need them to at least have, gone through someone below me to try and solve the problem, and then I can come in. And I've generally found that it's a much easier conflict resolution. But you've got to make sure that the egos don't play a role.
Yeah.
You can't feel like, well, I'm going to come solve the problem. It just needs that second voice, reaffirming exactly what you're saying.
That's so interesting, man. That really is fascinating. So, taking a different route now, I engage in what we say, personal conversations, talking about people's weight, for example. A lot of people are self-conscious about their weight. There might be uncomfortable conversations to be had about somebody taking accountability for their lifestyle, maybe how much they drink, etc., etc. If I'm wanting to get the most out of a difficult conversation, and I can see that somebody's maybe becoming uncomfortable, what are the cues that I would look for if I'm having that conversation with somebody and I can see that they're not maybe feeling very comfortable about the topic of conversation at hand? Because that would determine what route I would have to take that conversation, because otherwise somebody's just going to stonewall you, and they're just going to say, no, I'm shutting this down, and you're going to get nowhere. So what are the clues that people should look for when they're engaging in a sales conversation, when they're engaging in a personal conversation, if somebody's not feeling quite comfortable and we have to maybe pivot into a different direction? Okay.
First of all, what you're looking for is that glazed look in someone's eyes. So you've got something called a compliment sandwich. None of us like criticism All of us love compliments.
Yeah.
If I had to say to you, I like your shoes, you're looking good today, straight away you kind of positive endorphins come in and you feel good about yourself. It's that compliment. But if I had to criticize you and say, Clinton, your footwear, you can upgrade it a little bit. I'm actually going to activate fight or flight within your mind. And even though you know I'm joking right now, because I've criticized you, I've actually still irritated you. There's still something in you that says, excuse me, Dave, like I'm still, because I've activated fight or flight.
Durban in summer. Of course I can wear slops, man.
And
what are you talking about?
And that's exactly it. You either want to fight with me, you want to argue, or you want to flee. Now, you won't physically get up and run out the room, but you'll mentally switch off. You're like, that's it, I'm not listening to this idiot anymore. So you'll either physically switch off, or you'll argue back and say, Dave, dude, you live in Moy River. You're not the fashion police. Don't come and tell me how to come and dress when I'm in Durban. And you have that argument. So when we're engaging with people, you want to make sure we don't over-criticize. So when I was back at school, when I was in school, and if I was talking in class, you would always have a teacher that turn around and say, Dave, stop talking. And because they criticized once, you'd actually, sorry about that, and you would stop talking. But there's always that teacher that would over-criticize. There's always that teacher that would be like, Dave, stop talking. Why is it always you? Every time I turn around, you, and they kind of over-criticize. Now, did you get more and more interested in what the teacher had to say when that happened, or did you actually switch off?
Switch off.
Because they activated fight or flight. So the idea is that you want to try to do a compliment sandwich. A compliment, the criticism, and then the compliment. Dave, I love having you in my class. However, every time we talk, you distract the other kids, but I enjoy your enthusiasm. See you tomorrow. Now, when I run this with parents, teenagers, exactly the same thing. You kind of, and I say to parents of teenagers, when your kid comes home late and you moan at them, you get to a point that they get this glassy-eyed look in their face, and their eyes go this glassy, and we assume, or they didn't understand me, so we re-explain it. And they get more of a glassy-eyed look. Well, they still didn't understand, so we re-explain it. The glassy-eyed look means that they've mentally fled the room. You've activated fight or flight. They've already gone. So there's no point carrying on the conversation. Just end it. Come back later and say, listen, I don't know if I got my point across, but I really feel, and you almost act as your own second person. That law of the second person comes in because you're just reaffirming it later in a calmer voice and things are fun. And you want to use words such as, I feel like, because that's, I can't say, don't say like, you weren't listening. I say, I feel like you weren't understanding what I was saying. Because that opens dialogue, that opens conversation. Because I feel like we can discuss it. If I just say you weren't doing it, then it's a once-off, but I feel like you didn't quite understand, shall we discuss it? And so you kind of repeat it back. So if you've got something critical you have to say, just say it once, but don't over-explain it. If you find you have to explain it, end on a compliment. Or end on somebody to say, but you know what, you can do this. I've got faith in you. I know you're nervous about gym, but you can do this. And you actually want to end on that compliment.
Yeah.
You would, from a body language perspective, you would notice people slowly kind of go more on the balls of their feet. So they're trying to distance themselves from you. Or they'd actually put up some type of barrier. They'll start to either stand behind a chair or they want to put something in between you and them. So
arms folded?
Arms folded.
Something?
Legs over. And again, something that would have changed. So while you're talking to them, they're talking to you with their arms out. But the moment you mention their weight, all of a sudden, they kind of distanced themselves from you. That would be an indication that they're uncomfortable with what it is that you're about to talk on. And again, try and always end on their compliment.
Okay. So is it a good idea to let them know that you've noticed that body language?
No.
Okay. So that's just something that you're perceiving, and you're making then a call to say, okay, this person is clearly feeling a bit anxious about this topic or is feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I need to throw in a compliment here.
Yes.
And I need to get them back to neutral.
Yeah.
It's not, I see you've crossed your arms. What about this is making you uncomfortable, or why are you uncomfortable?
100%.
That's a no-go, right?
So don't point it out.
Okay.
What's nice thing to say is kind of that reassuring hand on the shoulder and say, listen, I'm with you on this. We can do that, and smile. Smiling is one of your biggest superpowers. I've actually got a whole chapter on smiling within the book. I mean, I know it sounds weird because, again, basics, we think, well, surely no one has to teach me how to smile. But smiling has got so many benefits. Smiling is contagious. If I smile at you, okay, you just thought creepy, thank you. But
You went into my creep category.
But if I smile at you, you naturally smile back at me.
Yeah.
And when the moment you smile, positive endorphins are released into your system, you start to feel good. And the Wayne State University actually did a couple of studies on smiling. They looked at American baseball cards, and they evaluated, the gait of the player's smile on their cards with longevity. They kind of looked at their lives, and then what they realized is that people that had a big smile actually lived longer and had happier marriages and happier lives than people that didn't smile. They were kind of grumpy. Up to 7.2 years longer. So quite a
Sure.
time.
That's substantial. Huh?
And because what happens is when you smile, positive endorphins are released into your system. It lowers your stress, lowers your risk of heart attack. And people want to be around you.
Yeah.
So now you're social. People like hanging out with you. No one wants to be with a grumpy person all the time. And so your relationships are better, your marriages are better, you have less stress, you live longer. And they are generalizing, they're taking, but when you look at the positive attributes that people have with smiling, and the fact that it is contagious. So again, if I smile at you, you naturally smile, return the smile.
Yeah.
And the moment you smile back at me, positive endorphins are released into your system. So you do start to feel good. And you associate me with that good feeling. So, I enjoy being around Dave. It makes me feel positive.
Yes.
And so I go into a trust category. And you'd also accept the criticism from someone that's smiling. So if you have to deliver that criticism aspect, at the end you can still smile. I mean, I've had naughty kids running camps, and I've had to moan at someone. And instead of saying, no, you stop talking and just going off, I actually say, hey, you really battled keeping quiet, don't you? Let's rather try and again, because I've done it with a smile, they don't realize that I'm actually having a go at them.
Yes.
I loved it. I was down in Texas a few years ago. And I loved the way that they would completely insult someone, but they would add the phrase, bless their heart. And it just been fine. They'd be like, that's the ugliest kid in the world, bless his heart. That is the stupidest kid, bless their heart. And it was like, you've just, the biggest insult. But the moment they added the word bless their heart, it was like, okay, it wasn't not too bad. It was not too bad. And it's almost like smiling has that effect. Like, listen, you are really trying my patience. Let's try and you actually smile and you diffuse it quite a bit.
Yeah. Is that a bit like yawning? Have you ever seen it like with you, some person yawns at the table, and then invariably there's the second one, then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth?
So I understand it's got to do with your mirroring effect. So you have empathy with someone else. So, because if I nod my head, you end up nodding your head because you're mimicking my body language, and you're within that, and you got empathy with, and you're within a friendship category. So the same thing would happen with, and the moment you mention yawning, now I want to yawn and transfer you, and it does have that is a good way of knowing that someone is in a trust category and they actually feel comfortable with you if they are mimicking your body language.
Okay, so if I'm nodding, let's say I'm in sales and I'm trying to execute a sale, trying to get somebody over the line. If I'm talking to them, would it be a good idea as I'm pitching the sale to be nodding my head?
Yes.
As I'm saying, okay, this is a great car for you, 6 airbags, done all the safety checks, that's going to subconsciously more likely get them to be on board for that sale?
Yes. So, okay, don't be the one idiot that kind of goes, this is the best car, and you overdo it. It's that small movement. So in order to know that someone is within your trust category, one thing you want to do is do a nod and see if they would copy on, or move forward slightly. So if I'm standing up and I'm here, but I just move into the balls of my feet slightly, and you stay exactly where you are, that means you're comfortable with me. But if you either put a barrier or lean back slightly, you're not as comfortable yet.
Yes.
So when you've greeted someone, hey, how are you doing? Welcome to our showroom. My name's Dave. I'd love to show you around. Anything you're needing. After that 2 minutes of general conversation, because you talk about the weather, what are you looking for, try and do a thing where you nod and see whether they agree with, or move forward slightly to see if they put any barrier. Because then you can tell whether someone's in that trust category. And so you definitely want to reaffirm something. And by you nodding it, they would nod. And so they would subconsciously start to agree or be more tempted to agree with what it is you are saying.
Got you.
Got
you. Dave, what is it personally about Decoding Body Language, your latest book, that you've enjoyed the most? I mean, you've taken us through a journey on how you've started the book, doing 30 minutes in the morning. As you reflect on the book now, and the finished product is there, and we'll chat about where people can find it soon enough. But what is it about writing this book that you've enjoyed the most?
I enjoyed the challenge. I love it when people now, when they say, oh, you wrote a book, because everyone's kind of got a story in them. Everyone's got something that they feel, they want to share that. Everyone's got a book in them, as some people say. And the moment someone says, oh, you wrote a book, and then they always add well, I've always wanted to write a book. If you could do it.
Yes.
And you're like, what do you mean if I could do it? Am I like the lowest measure of book writing or motivation? They kind of say, well, if you can write a book, then surely I could write a book. It's like, what do you mean if... And to me, it was that challenge, that idea of actually, can I create a product that people are going to enjoy? And then can I create a product that's practical? Because I sent it off to a couple of people to read, because my big thing I wanted to make sure was that it was practical. I wanted to use day-to-day language that people could understand and implement in their everyday lives. I didn't want to come in from a top-heavy...
super science-based
perspective that people don't fully understand. I want to say, I'm not explaining why you did. I'm just saying, if you nod your head, they will nod their head. This is the result. I'm not going into the whole science behind it as such. So I really enjoyed the challenge of putting it together. I enjoyed rekindling with old memories and people that I've worked with in the past, and realizing, wow, what a journey I've kind of been on in my life, from running camps, being a bouncer, working police, and some of the stories that are in there. And I really love the idea of making a practical book that people can implement and use on a daily basis. So I've sent out the book out to a couple of people to read, and I've had really good feedback. A lot of guys have loved it. I've had some nice reviews on it. And so now you've kind of got something that you're actually proud of.
Fantastic.
And I enjoy that.
That's so powerful as well. I think we all need in life something that we can be very proud of, and then once you do one thing that you are proud of, you're going to be like, well, that felt pretty good. Let me try and do the second thing that I'm proud of. The motivation
starts to come through because you took action. Yeah,
correct. Where can people find the book if they want to get their hands on a copy?
So right now they can download off Kindle. For international guests, it's on Amazon. It'll be soon on Bid or Buy.
Yes.
Or they can just email me at David@davidallen, DAVIDALLEN.Africa. So David@davidallen.Africa, and I'll actually sign it for them, and I will courier them a copy of it. So
I will include all of that in the show notes as well. So
wonderful.
For those of you listening, it'll be in the show notes. If you're wanting to get a copy of David's book, then follow the email address, follow the links in the show notes. And having read David's first book, I can certainly attest to the fact that there will be lots to take away. And if you'd like to get more information about the body language and decoding body language, head back to the first episode, where you can listen to this and then refer back to the first one, where David goes in depth about body language and how you can decode it. David, thank you so much. And man, what an exciting year for you. It's going to be 2025. We're here 25 years after the millennium. Can you believe it?
Yes.
So wishing you all the best for the year, the Hat-Trick Hero. And I think this book's going to do tremendously well. It's going to help a lot of people. So well done.
Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers. Not so fast. It is such a cool feeling when I see that Spotify subscribers number increase on the weekly, when I see the number of people listening to the episodes going up, and it really makes a huge difference. Have you ever done something and you feel so good when you get rewarded by some positive feedback and you really feel like you're making a difference? That's what it means to me, and that's how I feel. And it goes a long way if you like the show, share it and subscribe it. Thank you humbly, and I'll see you next week.